So I was born and raised in Maryland most of my life. Primarily lived in Montgomery County, like northern DC area. I was raised by a single mom up until I was 7, 8 years old. My immediate family and my extended family all attended the same church in DC that my grandmother attended. So it's kind of like what you did on Sunday mornings. You went to Sunday school at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. You attended church. If there was a late service, you attended that service. You were there all day long sometimes. I personally did not care for it. I liked my sleep. I didn't like waking up early. I didn't understand why we were doing it, especially since what we were learning at church and learning about God and Christ was not implemented at home, not the way that it was taught at least. There wasn't any deep connection to the Bible, God, the building, or the people. So.
Yeah. When you moved up to Frederick, did you continue to go to church in DC or did things change?
We would go to DC on major occasions, like if someone was getting baptized or something like that, family events or something. But we did find a church here in Frederick that we attended.
Because at that point, you're probably old enough to tell your parents, specifically your mom,
No, you can't.
Okay,
No,
you can't.
You don't
Okay,
say you're not going to church. Here you go.
When did it all start to click for you? When did it went from cultural church family stuff to, oh wait, I really do want to believe in this and have this in my life?
I had a lot of fear from acknowledging that I had just finished community college and was going to Towson, and I don't know how to navigate this. I was a broke student. So I think a lot of that, I cried when I had to take out a student loan. I didn't want a student loan. But I think a lot of that just wrestling inside of me was the first moment that I was like, hey, you're here. Why not start truly pouring in wholly to God? And I want to say stepping on faith, back then when I was going to Towson was the first experience. Strongly just said, Lord, I die to myself and sacrifice wholly to you because I can't do it. I met my ex-husband right as I was transferring to Towson the summer before I started my first semester at Towson. The same year I was going to graduate was the same year that he proposed, and 6 months after graduation, we married.
How old were you guys at the time? Were you
21, 22.
Yeah, so young.
Yeah, young. Foolish.
Yeah.
First year of marriage, we experienced a lot of heavy items from assumed, I guess you can say presumed infidelity, the death of his grandmother, the death of my great-grandmother. I miscarried. We continued to try to work things out. Eventually, we had our daughter in the spring of 2013. So in the beginning of all of it, there was no faith. We weren't going to church or anything. And I just kind of woke up one day when I was pregnant and I said, if we want to continue working through this, we have to incorporate church.
Yeah.
And so she was born, and I would say 6 months after that, we started church hunting in Anne Arundel County. My faith was improving, and I feel I felt growth and I was involved. I served at the time it was called Remix, so the middle and high school ministry, but he wasn't very connected with the church. He would attend, but I just think it wasn't for him. I started saying a prayer over myself because I knew I couldn't do it. So my prayer was basically apologizing to God for living out how I chose to live and not his will for my life. And then just begging him to remove any people, habits, things that were not of his will, because that's what I wanted to follow from that point. I wanted to be at church opposed to growing up, not really understanding that why I was there. I wanted to be there. I loved my middle and high school girls. By 2015, he decided that he no longer wanted to be married and kind of just walked out. But it wasn't until when he left that I realized, left the second time actually, that I realized that was my prayer being answered.
Wow. Okay, so now you're a single mom in a new place, finding a new job, new church. What was that like?
Society teaches women marriage is the goal, and when marriage didn't work out for me, it was okay, well, what now? I also too struggled because I didn't want to be a single mom. I was raised by one, and while she did the best she could, it wasn't a dynamic that I wanted for myself or my children. So I beat myself up a lot. There was no grace. you told me a lot that I need to show myself grace. But there was no grace. I didn't feel like I deserved grace. I also feel like God just wasn't there. Like the promise of him being present, he wasn't there. And it was just yet another thing I had to deal with. So while I was present and I was showing up, that mustard seed of faith, I had a half of a mustard seed of faith. But I knew it would change. I've seen it change. So I just pressed in.
Even while you were struggling with your own faith, even while you're struggling with what is God doing in my life, even while you're struggling with an ex who was choosing to make things harder, and you just kept showing up. Why?
Well, for starters, I was drowning. I was drowning mentally, spiritually, emotionally, to the point where it felt like I couldn't breathe. So I had to literally tell myself, listen, if you don't let some of this go, or if you don't change, you're going to kill yourself from the stress. Leading up to this point in my life, no one's ever really taken the charge to say, I'm going to let God rule over every aspect of my life or their life. Just wanting to be a better, healthier me for myself, for the little girl that I needed in myself, but then also for my daughter and the children that, not that I just serve here, but any child that I come across in my life. I think just the way that I think now is differently. It's not perfect. Like, I still struggle with anxiety and depression. I just think acknowledging that I have those things and they're not me. And I have them because of very valid reasons. Like, I've experienced a lot of things, but that doesn't mean I have to stay there. I don't get as upset when someone tries to use those items against me, because it just shows the lack of empathy and sympathy in them, lack of grace and love in them. So I don't take that personal anymore. But in turn, I also kind of just pray for certain people that I truly don't care for, including my ex-husband. Like, he's just one person that I'm not angry anymore with him, because I know he has his own journey he has to take and he has to work through things. And until he does, this is just the dynamic it's going to be. The only thing I can do is just pray for a better relationship, better communication. There doesn't even necessarily have to be a relationship, but better communication for the sake of our child, so that she can grow up, even with her parents' divorce, have both happy parents and can have moments that she can look back on and say, yeah, they're divorced, but I was able to do this with them. Like, that's my end goal for her. I think believing that I wasn't a failure because of my divorce, and believing that God loves me no matter what, which is, I've seen it. As a single mom, like, I remember when Ari was born, so 9 years ago, I looked on the calendar and I was like, oh, her 5th birthday falls on a Saturday. I'm gonna take her to Disney. I said that in the hospital. Wow. And on her 5th birthday, I still took her to Disney, even as a single mom. Like, I purchased my first home as a single mom. It's worked out, and all I've done is follow the steps that he's written in his word.
Yeah. Marriage struggles, divorce struggles, single moms, single dads, who are in the thick of it. What advice would you give them? What encouragement would you give them? What faith, wisdom would you give them?
So I think the first thing I would say is be nice.
It's underrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, if third parties are needed, utilize them. Pray. Go to church. Believe in, even when you don't believe. Truly prioritize your family. If it doesn't work out, still prioritize them, because they're still your family. Yeah. Just looks differently. Also, never give up on yourself. Like, you're not a failure. Keep pushing. Show up.
Thank you for doing this and sharing your story, because it matters so much. Thanks.
Welcome.